Thanks, Abhi. I arrived at the CSSC a very long time ago, far longer than you would imagine. So there was no thinking around archiving then at all. So the idea of the archiving itself, though, is now close to 30 years old. And so it's really in the 90s that this project emerged. And so just to flag 3 or 4 things about this archive, since this is called Old Roots, New Journeys, in some sense, when some of us began to think of building an archive as part of an academic research institution, where our funding agencies, which were the West Bengal government and the central government, gave us nothing beyond barely meeting salaries and barely keeping a roof over our heads, and that's still true. So we had to find other sources for thinking about it. So just very briefly, it began with a very, very simple exercise in microfilming a large body of Bengali periodicals which were literally rotting in the oldest institution in the city, which was the Bangio Sahitya Parishad, and then working with many, many smaller libraries. So it began as a textual archival project, microfilm, still using analog material, and much later that became digitized. The visual archive project begins with an IFA grant, and that's where I come in. It came, and I like to say that because we're an archive added to an academic institution, it was driven very much by the academic interests of the faculty there. So as an art historian, the only one in that institution, I was very, very interested in documenting what I considered a larger, broader visual resource for writing social and cultural history. And it came straight out of my own book project, my first book, The Making of a New Indian Art, where I found none of the material I was looking for existed in any museums. Even Abanindranath Tagore was in a trunk, and it was not in any museum. So I realized the urgency of tapping private collections. So much of our archiving endeavor was really one of salvaging and bringing into a public domain what would otherwise be fast disappearing off the face of the city. And with the art market growing, a lot of it has since left the city. So literally over the 30 years, I've seen the material leave the city, and our archive often remains the only visual record of what existed. So that was a first very primary impulse, was just to say. The other thing to say, we never had the resources to collect original documents, and in most cases, the original material were not going to be handed over to us. They were either in libraries, they were in private collections. What came to us were photographs and ephemera, like print advertisements, commercial art, but we never had the resources to really be an archive of original material, which is why the digital turn was a great aid. So we exist largely as a collated mass of digitized documents that exist in several small private repositories, many of which no longer exist even in the city. So I'd just like to put it out there that putting this and bringing it into a public domain has been we are an open access archive. Some of the visual material is still copyrighted. So we have, for instance, the Ahmed Ali collection, which we can show people, but for any reproduction, we need to go back. So bringing material from the private into a public domain of use, circulation, and research has been the driving motive there. But in the end, we are an archive attached to a larger academic institution. By now, it has a separate location and a profile. So that's where we are, and we focused on text and visual image. One thing I miss, and I just listening to Rustam particularly reminded me, is that what we missed out doing was building a parallel oral history archive, and one learns from many mistakes. And just like Rustam, you said that you wish you'd done the headphone recording at the time of acquiring. What I greatly regret is that many of the collectors from whom we archive were living archives themselves. They were huge repositories of memory, and I wish we had recorded and documented each of them so that each collection would have a person, not just the object, but the person behind these collections. So, but we are trying to do that now so that every new thing that we now document, we do have oral history interviews to back it. But we are largely a digital archive of text and images pertaining to 19th and 20th century Bengal, now into the 21st century. And I must thank IFA to say that working with Vishwajyoti, Afra, and Chujan, who's not here, was one of the most fun things that ever happened in the archive. We normally open it up to academic researchers. This is the first time that we had creative practitioners coming to work with it. We gave them the full liberty to do what they wanted to with the material, and you see some of the results. But it was a hugely rewarding experience for us, and we had an exhibition at the end of it, and we still recall it, and we're looking forward to one more phase of collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Tapati. Professor Shubha, if you could tell us something about what kind of archive you came into when you had joined ERC, if there was one, and over the years, what really has changed in terms of the methodologies of collecting?
I was part of the starting staff, so I was there with tape number 1. So it's not like there was an archive. I think what's different about us compared to a lot of people here is that we are an archive primarily. Everything else we do is coming out of being an archive. We are not a we're the Archives and Research Center for Ethnomusicology. So the Research Center kind of tags on to the archive rather than the other way around. The initial impulse, and some of it still remains, was to create an archive of music and performance, which is what ethnomusicology is, that it's the context in which music happens. So every kind of context of music making, as we like to call it, is part of the collections. Now, one major thing was that collections like this, the older collections, were not available in India. So the repatriation discourse was very much part of its initial and has remained. So we've continued to try and bring collections which are otherwise held in archives abroad. It was also because recording technology was a Western thing. It's the Western scholars who had access to it. There were older collections sitting in London or Berlin or wherever. And so we spent and continue to try to get these collections. We also gave priority to collections made by foreign scholars because they would then leave and then not be available. So, we had this model from the beginning of trying to contact people to say, well, you want to preserve video, some film and so on. But we also have, through the years, accumulated fair amount of images, some originals, few, like Solvin's portraits of musical instruments from 1825 or so. I have 15 of the original.
If I just may quickly interrupt, and I'll come to you afterwards, Surajit, but just to ask, what exactly does the original document mean to you, Tapati, and to you, Shubha? Because on the one hand, you're receiving records. And
I'm talking about original physical paper document.
Got it.
But for original recording is, you see, it doesn't make a difference, especially with the digital thing, but there are, you say this is the original recording made by so-and-so in this year, and in most cases not. In most cases it's a copy we made or somebody else made, and like the oldest collections we have Fox Steinway's 1902 and 3, there were cylinders transferred by the, then National Sound Archive in Britain to reels. By the time, then they're digitized. So the original for recordings is not very much, but as I'm saying, we have a large number now of documents as well, which is not how we started out, but slowly the document and image collection also has grown. So we are looking more at other media as well.
And for you, Tapati, what does the original document mean, which you said that CSSSC has fairly less of?
So that very often we were doing the basic work of measuring, cataloging, putting dates, etc., and giving them a full, initially a set of slides and now a digital set with a full catalog. So very often it was the first time this was being done for any of their collection. Now with the original, it's a great regret that very often when people do come, and people have sometimes come with a trunk of photographs and said keep them because we do not have any other home for it. Our house is getting demolished. We've retrieved newspapers like this, which we still cannot conserve, but we've digitized the full collection. As a historian who's worked with original records in archives and with original objects in museums, I don't have any fetish for the original, but I'm still saying is what the fate of what we digitize remains a big concern. Those which are circulated on the market will have its own life. But it's the ephemera, and I think we've been having a conversation, it's often ephemera which needs to get collected most because that's what gets just disposed. And with photographs, again, we don't know that is there such a huge distinction between having a copy of a negative and then the original negative? So with the photographic collection, I think what we have is almost as good, but it would still nonetheless be wonderful to have had the actual prints. But with a lot of the paintings, the commercial art, and say book illustration, book covers, I think don't really miss the original so much because I think a lot of it was meant to be there in multiple versions. So if you think of say a printed advertisement or a book cover or a label, a product label, these were not meant to be unique objects. So they were meant to be in the public domain. So I thought collecting and collating them and bringing it all under one fairly diverse body was what we achieved. And the idea was to make it, and as I said, as an academic, I still believe that this is a huge resource for writing new kinds of histories of the period, and also for other people in other fields to come in and use it for within their own fields of creative work or profession.
And this brings me to you, Surajit, because over here we have something which is an open template, and the nature of the document is not already decided. In fact, it's not just not decided, it's open to multiple possibilities. So what exactly do you conceive the archive at CCK to really collect as a way to build an archive? What is the document?
Well, I think it begins from the fact that the Center for Community Knowledge is an oral knowledge research center. So we started out, when the center started out 6 years ago, the mandate was to look at orality knowledge forms and how does that connect up within the city of Delhi, outside the city, so on and so forth. And if you want to understand the city of Delhi orally, all you have to do is talk to people in your class, and on the street, in the metro. You discover different ways of understanding the city. And so the question began, how does one document this? And then how does this multiplicity come together in a form that you can sense the multiplicity even as you just see it at one layer? And well, I divided at this point into two sections. One is the collection of these multiplicities, and then is the dissemination of the exhibition of it. The collection process actually turned out far better than we thought, because we started, besides the traditional life history interviews of people in town who've lived here for many decades, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 decades, 8 decades, to what we started off this neighborhood museum program in Delhi, which has now become an annual feature. We just pick up one part of town and collect local histories of that part of town to be exhibited in the locality. And it's never exhibited outside the locality. We hope at some point of time all of these local collections will be shown at the university in some building, but that's still to come. Probably before that, the archive, the dissemination becomes important, that some of this local histories of Delhi come together in this, what we are calling, the umbrella, we're calling it the Delhi Citizens Memory Archive. Part of it is what IFA is helping us with, is the visual archive, collection of photographs we've got from people in town. One of the essential things about the work we're doing in the center is we are not approaching institutions to tell us histories of whatever we are collecting. We are approaching people. So it's like people who had a camera in 1930 somehow through the university discovered that this gentleman was as a young, he's got very old photographs. We land up at his place to discover that he's like, otherwise he's a chartered accountant, but he's a manic photographer and has been so since the age of 14, which was the year 1936. So he's got photographs from 1936 to 2000 of places in the city, and because he wanted, like as he told us in one of his conversations with us, he said, this is when I lost myself, otherwise being a CA is very boring. Right? But I needed to, this was where I got energy from. So he went all over the city with his camera and doing the kind of things, and because he lived here for a long time, he knew the place. Similarly, the neighborhood museums we do, because we are also looking for kind of visual material, so we ask our kind of colleagues in the neighborhood, partners in these museums, point us to the oldest photographs of this place. And we are discovering photographs from West Delhi. The Najafgarh Canal looks like a place where people used to go hunting rather than where you have to hold your nose as you walk past it today. I mean, this entire change of the city is actually held by the people. The point is then to...
But so to come back to the collection, how does one think of a collection for this multiplicity and multitude?
So how do you think of the collection? To begin with, first you've got to put the collection out there for people to see. That's where we've been kind of grappling for a long time. You're familiar
First to
with
receive
this.
the collection,
We
just
and
then transact.
we see the dissemination. One is the actual physical dissemination in the localities. We do it through the exhibitions, we do it through little handouts we make. And now we're trying to also do it using the web archive as a website kind of to show all this material. One of the ways that we are having to really grapple with is how does one layer photographic data with oral histories in a way that you can move from one to the other without seeing each, without it becoming like the internet on its own, in which you stop looking at everything else and you just look at one. Because all of this is coming from what we are discovering as we collect this material is that each artifact impinges on the other. The history that you get is talking about an event which this photograph is capturing a minute part of. How do you make these connections? It's something that we are still grappling with. We're hoping that in the course of the year, when finally the CCK's Delhi archive finally goes online, sometime in the middle of the year, we hope that some of these interconnections and layers one will begin to see. But it's going to be clearly an ongoing process for quite a while to come, because it needs more than just 3 or 4 people to be able to make this. It needs a lot more give and take, and I'm hoping that at some point of time, experiences like calling in artists in to just throw the material in front of them and ask them to, okay, now what associations do you make? Because if I'm getting stuff from people who don't exist anymore, they're gone, I need imaginations to come into play. I mean, I cannot think of any other way to do this.
And because of the lack of time, we want to not have what we had in the last session, which was to lengthen a panel by half an hour.
Just briefly respond.
Yes.
What you said in terms of doing neighborhood museums and getting communities, both collecting oral history, collecting photographs, going into people's homes and doing it. I just wanted to mention that IFA has been part of a recent project which was called Jitpur Local, and where we took just a series of streets, and that to Jitpur is the whole area, and where we had groups of artists, and in this phase, visual artists, who then each did a project around one particular small home or an institution, a photographic studio, a police station, an old medicine shop. And we found that what was interesting was not both that local people suddenly were taking new pride in what they had been living with all the time, and a lot of it was in chambers, and we had artists coming in repainting walls using stories they were giving. So, an old Purohit, they found a photograph, you painted his picture on a wall and things like that. But more important was people from other parts of Kolkata all came. Now, people go there only during maybe Durga Puja and walk those places because they have some of them. But we really found that it was a voyage of discovery for people from the West. So I think it may be quite a good model to use, to try it out perhaps even for one neighborhood in Old Delhi to do it.
I had a lot of other questions, but in the interest of time, I'm going to open the floor to 2 questions. If anyone may raise their hands, we're going to take 2, and then we're going to... I had questions even about access, and when I first visited the ARC archive, I was blown because I had so far mostly been visiting archives with textual and photographic documents, which basically the nature of access coincides with the object. When you see the object, that is the document, right? Whereas in ARC, you pick up the document, which is a tape. You don't see anything. And basically you have 4 hours of footage on it. How are you even going to start thinking of annotating those 4 hours? How are you going to start accessing the reel in entirety? Are you going to go through ever the entire span of the archive? Well, you can't do that with any archive. But with ARCE or a sound archive, it just becomes a whole different ballgame of what access and protocols of accessibility mean, which would have been interesting challenges for the grantees who would have accessed these collections. And with CCK, it opens up a whole different can of worms where it's a completely open-ended question as to what exactly is going to become the repository, which is constantly in flux. But for the interest of time.
The session is going to do that. The first session tomorrow will be about access and other technical kind of things that one needs.
Perfect. So first session tomorrow is going to be about access and protocol. So 2 questions. Please raise your hands and we'll move on to the next part of this panel. There's one here. A mic, please.
I wanted to ask, so I was reading about before 1990s, how there was a project of documenting the experiences of people affected by AIDS in USA. And I see that as a very political project also, to document that. And so that if you sense that there is a certain kind of erasure, so you remove that erasure by documenting it and bringing into the archives, through which different kind of struggles can also take formations. Because once you can't really articulate your own suffering, then you can't really fight for it also. So is there an attempt, when you say that you are bringing in oral archives or through various sources, is there an attempt where there are such conscious decisions, or maybe the political decisions are being also taken?
Is this addressed to anyone in particular?
Not particular, but open to all.
And any other question which we can gather immediately? Yes.
You talked about access, acquisition, collections. Another kind of the discourse of giving back beyond dissemination. I know ARC does a lot with it, and I'm wondering if first you, Shubha, and then Surajit and Tapati could speak a little bit more about what kinds of repatriation might be involved in working with communities to give back, and how you do it. I know that you have a quite elaborate program of how you work with communities in terms of giving back the knowledge.
Thanks, Ika. Part of the repatriation, actually step 1 is for ourselves, is to be able to bring collections into the archives in India, you know, when we're talking about collections that were held abroad. And with one particular collection of Anand Vakidat, ethnomusicologists who worked in India in the 30s, we've done a lot of informal, giving bits and pieces as and when we recognize something to institutions, to people, for them to work with more locally, and hoping, of course, that they give us some documentation in return. So I think we gave material of Tulu and to RRC, Udupi, and it kind of has gone on through various such channels, giving people their kind of material. I think last year Lamo, that many of you know about, came to us for material from Ladakh. And we had some films which we knew had some of Ladakh somewhere we didn't know. So actually Tashi sat and looked at the footage and told us what was what in Ladakh. And there was actually a portion that belonged to the place he was shooting. So it was kind of wonderful for him. So there's kind of a lot of these kind of collaborative things that happen with more direct access. The other is, a project that that we did called Archives and Community Partnership, which was a documentation with the community, with asking the community to lead the process of documentation and for them to have access, to have copies of all that with full rights to do as they wanted. Because we couldn't change the nature of the archive material that came in with other agreements, but at least we could create material that could, help them. So people's own idea, I want for teaching, I want to be able to hear one old master, do you have my father's wedding, So all those could be dealt with. We also, for that, produced a set of CDs of archival material of iconic musicians that people had said, and this was for Rajasthan, where they had asked for certain musicians, and it was kind of how to do this ethically. So we brought this out as a series of CDs, 35% of which went into the community for them to use as they like, sell, not sell, gift, whatever, to the performers, to everybody else. And the others, 65 are being still sold by us to give more global access. So these are some of the things I can think of. So I don't know, we also recently done 2 years of working with community radio, Gurgaon Ki Awaaz, where we did a series on music and migration actually. And that was not so much repatriation as making things available from the archives to the kind of rural audience we can never reach otherwise. So it was quite wonderful, and we kind of hope to repeat that. So various things we do. We've also, I should mention, supported community archives where we can. One in Rajasthan with the Mangaliya Lok Sangeet Sansthan, a young musician who's trying to run it. I worked in Kutch with the Kutch Mahila Vikas Sangathan, with Surwani project there, and in Phek in Nagaland, where we went with the Uramili and had some way in our grant that we could give them a video recorder, an audio recorder, and I bought them with my own money a second-hand computer so that they could do it, so that the Chakisan Cultural Preservation Society, as they call it in Phek, is maybe started off to a new archive there. So we try to support these impulses of local community archives wherever we can, whichever way we can. Thanks.
Okay. Anyone for the first question?
I don't think, just very briefly to say, since our archives has not really, we've never really taken away anything to be, so the question of repatriation doesn't come in. But just very briefly, what does come in though is that since we've had to build relationships of what people call trust and goodwill, which has allowed people to very openly share their material, and for us to openly share our material to a wider group with some minimum restriction. The giving back here, I feel, is maintaining a link, because very often the first generation we worked with are no more. It's their families, and very often it's often students, etc., who will then come and use, and very often their families direct people to us to say, our collection is documented there, it's fully catalogued, it's easier for you to go and see it there. So to maintain that social network for us has been very important, both with smaller institutions and with people. So I suppose that is the small way of perhaps giving back, is to keep the link alive even when the collector's gone, with families, with students, with youths. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
I'm afraid we're going to close this section of the panel discussion here. And thank you all very much. We're going to now call on the dais the different presenters, the grantees who had worked in each of these archives, to share their projects. And then we're going to do a rounded Q&A with the grantees after this. So thank you again. And we request you